Hey, it's Rachel Cooke, your modern mentor. I'm the founder of Lead Above Noise, a firm specializing in activating workplaces, helping leaders bring simplicity, ease, and big giant results to the forefront. Remember, your questions and curiosities are the fuel behind the show. So if something workplace related has been on your mind, leave me a voicemail with your question at 201-677-8113, and I may just answer it on a future podcast. So this week, I had a real gift of an experience. I was sitting with a friend in a coffee shop, and we saw a guy outside try to pull the door to come on in. No biggie, happens all the time, right? You try to pull a door, it doesn't budge, so you realize you need to push it. But this guy, he was committed. We watched him pretty nearly break a sweat trying to yank that door open. Eventually, he figured it out. But for a while there, all I could think was, hey man, really seems like pulling isn't the solution you're looking for. Maybe try a push. Okay, enough about this poor guy. But it is a metaphor for today. Because today, I want to talk about problems. The kind that arise time and again, but we keep implementing the same wrong solutions. The kind where we keep on pulling when what we need is a push. They do, I believe, call that insanity. Trying the same thing over and over, but expecting a different result. So here are some of the problems I see on repeat, where it's time to bring in some new solutions. Number 1, people are burned out. I mean, this one kind of blows my mind. I feel like I'm still seeing the same posts, the same conversations on LinkedIn today that I was seeing 5 years ago. Leaders are acknowledging burnout as real, and they're committing to combating it. But the solutions they're implementing, they just haven't changed. And nobody is asking the question, why are we still battling burnout? This comes up in pulse checks all the time. Teams talk about their overwhelm, their lack of clarity, their 5,000 priorities, their lack of resources, their constant busyness. And when I ask what their leaders are doing to help them, they still talk about quarterly mental health days or offers of virtual yoga classes, meditation sessions, or employee assistance programs providing counseling services or fitness benefits. Listen, these benefits are all great, and I tell leaders if you can swing them, bring them. But they're cures for a problem that we should be solving, preventing rather than treating. The problem is these things are sexy, they're buzzy, and they get attention. And the stuff companies should be doing? Well, they're less sexy. They're things like really ruthlessly prioritizing and holding leaders accountable to taking something off the list when something new is added. It's demanding better meeting hygiene, ensuring that meetings only happen with clear objectives, the right attendees, and an accountability for action. It's matching resources with expectations. I keep hearing about teams of 3 people and some really dated technology being tasked with delivering the work of 40 people using robots. Leaders have to be sense-checking what they're asking of their teams and tools before setting those expectations. When we're ready to make headway on these and many other contributors to burnout, we see the tide turn, with or without the yoga. Problem number 2, the organization's structure isn't working. Oh boy, this one is a biggie, because here's what happens over and over and over. Something in an organization isn't working. Projects aren't being delivered well, or innovation isn't happening, or decisions aren't getting made, or a million other things. And way too often in these cases, a senior leader decides it's time for a reorg because they assume the problem is reporting lines or formal decision rights or how teams intersect or overlap on an org chart. But here's the truth. Organization problems are almost never caused by structure. Reorging is painful and confusing and expensive and exhausting, and it should be done very rarely and thoughtfully. We too often change structure to try to solve problems of people, process, and resource. Like if something's not being delivered, before you assume the solution is to change where teams report and who's the boss, consider, do we have the right people with the right skill and capability and bandwidth on the case? Do we have basic processes like approvals, decision-making, and problem resolution that are serving our goals? Do we have the right tools, access, and knowledge management available? Org structure, for some reason, often seems the most obvious choice. But if structure isn't the underlying problem, and really it almost never is, then it's not going to solve whatever's really happening. So check your blind spots, ask your teams what holds them back, and be willing to make real changes. Problem number 3 is people aren't doing what they're supposed to. Like coaching or giving feedback or collaborating or innovating or making decisions efficiently. All the things. Not uncommon for one or many of these issues to pop up. And commonly when they do, senior leaders default to a training program. People aren't coaching or innovating or making good decisions? Well, let's train them on how to do it. Listen, I do leadership development for a living. I believe in it as a solution, but only to the right problem. Leadership development is amazing at building capability and confidence, at creating space for practice and accountability. But those aren't always the reasons that people aren't doing the thing. Too often, I hang in organizations where people aren't innovating not because they don't know how, but because they have no time or freedom to experiment and maybe even fail, or because someone shoots down a new idea every time they raise one. Sometimes great decisions aren't getting made because frontline leaders just aren't empowered to make them. They have to ask permission for everything, which creates bottlenecks. Sometimes leaders aren't coaching because they themselves are being micromanaged, so they simply do the same with their own teams. Organizations love training programs because if they're effective, they can be a bit of a magic bullet, but they don't solve organization design or behavior problems. So if something isn't happening as it should, start by asking why not, and what changes could we make to drive new behavior. And problem number 4, no one seems to be connected anymore. This one has gotten really hot in the past few years. With the explosion of hybrid and remote work, which, yes, are here to stay, feelings of connection have been lessened or lost. And companies, rightfully, want to change that. But too often they're imposing solutions on people that are backfiring. Companies today are still forcing fun. They're doing in-office ice cream parties or mandatory everyone comes in on Tuesdays, things that compel people to be physically present. But connection doesn't just come from physical proximity. It comes from intimacy, from building meaningful relationships with others, from collaborating purposefully on a project, from sharing wins and failures, from asking questions and receiving thoughtful advice. So how can organizations create this experience? Well, ask your teams. How do you prefer to experience connection, and how can we better facilitate it? I've helped clients set up peer mentoring programs, job shadow and rotations, lunch and learn series, programs through their employee resource groups, new approaches to brainstorming and sharing knowledge. There are countless ways to drive connection. Ping me for more ideas anytime. And there you have it. Being a problem solver is a great thing, but if you're feeling frustrated by something happening on repeat, take a step back and ask yourself, am I just pulling a door that's screaming to be pushed? And what might that push look like? Join me next week for another great episode. Until then, visit my website at leadabovenoise.com if your workplace could use an activation boost, a talk, a workshop, a pulse check, you choose. You can follow Modern Mentor on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Find and follow me on LinkedIn. Thanks so much for listening and have a successful week. Modern Mentor is a quick and dirty tips podcast. It's audio engineered by Dan Feuerbend. Our director of podcasts is Brandon Getchis. Our podcast and advertising operations specialist is Morgan Christensen. Our digital operations specialist is Holly Hutchings. Our marketing and publicity assistant is Davina Tomlin. And Cameron Lacey is our marketing contractor.